In fact, I was hoping that Penny would have some further ado. Just in sense of being really prepared for this discussion. I'm not going to do justice to the discussion on today, but it is an incredibly significant discussion, this whole question of the nation. On yesterday, during the discussion, I mentioned how one writer had said that everybody sort of knows what the nation is until you ask them what it is, you know, and that the author wrote a pretty interesting tone here, struggling around the fact of what the question of what constitutes a nation, and the fact that there are so many varying definitions of the nation, but there it is. It's obviously there. It obviously plays like a really important role in the affairs of human beings, and it has done so for a long time. But this assumption, of course, that the nation is something that has always been there is another question. It's people speak of the nation as if it were, the 11th commandment that Moses came down from the mountain with, let there be nations or something like that. And that is not the case. It is not. Our discussion around the nation, as most discussions that we see spoken about or written about, really is connected to the development of nations in Europe, which is not to say that nations did not exist before. What did not exist, I think, some of the definitions of what we characterize as nations today, and what did not exist before was a consolidation of a sense of sameness by all those people who characterize themselves as Europeans. That's the thing that did not exist before. And there is a material basis for that. It is not that, suddenly all the white people, just declared, or Europeans declared they were part of the same nation. That's fantasy. For long periods of time, in places like France, the majority of the population didn't even speak French. Only a certain sector of the elite spoke the language. And that's not just true of France, but that's in some other places. I've read that for mass communications, of course, and the assumption of the existence of a nation, there has to be a vernacular. People, have to, have a common lingua franca, is that what it's called? But for long periods of time, the nobility didn't even speak the same language as the majority of the people who lived in Europe. And but something happened, and something happened to consolidate what people refer to as nations. And what we are talking about now is what happened immediately in Europe, which is not to say that there was not a sense of sameness and material basis for people being united before that. But much of, there's this thing that characterization we have like BC, before Christ. Well, there should be a BW, before white people, because, because much of what we understand and how we describe phenomenon in the world today is based on the advent of European or white power in the world. And we'll say just a few things about that. Even how Europeans have gone to other places in the world, and we read history today, and they say, when the Europeans got there, they met the king, the Indian king. In this instance, I mean, in the Americas, the American people, they spoke with the king, or they were in Africa and they met with the king someplace, and they talk about things like nobility, like much of what you see happening, or what we've seen happen in places like, what was the place where this great terrible, horrible genocide happened, Rwanda, right? And the Belgians got there, and first the Germans colonized that, and then Rwanda was given to the Belgians when because Germany lost the war, and so they had to sit down and say, okay, Belgium, you can have these Negroes. And but the fact is that the Belgians, like you read about the great horrific violence and murders that happened, maybe 1 million people in a matter of just a few weeks murdered there. And they talk about how this historical hatred between the Hutu and the Tutsi, was the basis of it, irrational, just mad hatred. What they don't say is that the Bahutu and Batutsi had lived together for ages, in what they call Rwanda, what they now call Rwanda. It's the Belgians, when they got there, who decided that they characterized the Batutsi as being tall and features that were most closely like the white people, and the Bahutu, who they saw as stocky and shorter with different kinds of features in their imagination, were like the peasantry. So and also there was an arrangement that had come about among the people who lived in that area. The Batutsi were cattle herders, and the Bahutu were agriculturalists. And when the Batutsi moved to that area, there had emerged a relationship between them where the Batutsi became like, I don't know if you can characterize it as administrators or what have you in the territory, but it was not a hierarchical kind of relationship where there was obvious oppression and exploitation. And that was something that's really difficult for Europeans to understand. Like for the Europeans, like it's always like a hierarchical relationship, where in much of the world, the relationships are much like, like a pebble thrown into like water, and it sort of reverberates outwardly. It's not like somebody is up here and somebody is down there. But the point is that the Belgians decided that the Batutsi were the nobility and the Bahutu constituted the peasantry or the serfs. And they were moving off, of course, their own experiences in Europe. And so they defined this, but the problem is the Belgians who were in control of the situation, they also set up the school system, the European-based school system in what we call Rwanda. And taught in the schools under the Belgians was that the Tutsi was nobility and the Bahutu were serfs. That was taught in the schools that was introduced by Belgium in what we now call Rwanda. Just like my children get taught in schools in this country based on a colonial oppressor nation view of what the world is and how it should function and how you should wear your pants and your hats and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the same thing was true there. And so whereas in the beginning there was no enmity between the groups, the Belgians actually utilized the Batutsi as the administrators for Belgian colonialism and provided favors to them that gave them a different reality, a different material reality from the Bahutu and the Batwa, which was another ethnic group there. And they used the Batutsi for long periods of time to control the rest of Rwanda. And what happened is that the struggles for independence had begun to ignite and capture the imaginations of African people throughout the continent, and it also came to Rwanda. And surprise, it was not the Bahutu that demanded independence, it was the Batutsi who had been put in place to rule over them for the Belgians who demanded independence. But the Belgians then created their own Hutu organization. And the Hutu organization that was created by the Belgians said, we don't want independence until we free from our Batutsi nobility. And hence you have, in the late 50s, early 60s, the origin of the contradiction that led to all those people dying, you know, this is Belgians doing, that led to this attack on the Tutsi that killed thousands of them and chased many of them into exile. And these were people who were trying to fight for independence from Belgium. So there was no contradiction before, no enmity before. It was only after colonial domination that you saw this thing emerge there. But the basic point that I want to make is that people had relationships long before Europe, long before Europeans mastered fire. Long before Europeans mastered fire, that is to say, were able to cook food, you know, by fire, that people had magnificent civilizations. I may have mentioned to you that I was in Cozumel, Mexico, last month, and I went to the Maya ruins. And it's really interesting because the Maya had a magnificent civilization here. Civilization 3,000 years before, 3,000 years BC. Mayans, magnificent civilization. And are considered by many the mother culture in the Americas. And the tour guide talked about that. And talked about how the first people walked, you know, from Asia, across the Bering Strait and what have you. And then until I asked him about the Olmec. And the Olmec were here 2,000 years before the Maya, which means 7,000 years ago, the Olmec were here. But they didn't walk, they didn't come from Asia. Anybody ever seen the pictures of the Olmec? The heads that they've seen, tons, that they don't even know how they got the materials that they built these heads weighing tons from this large distance to where they were actually, you know, carved into features of human beings. And if you see them, of course, it's really clear that all of them look like Chimurenga. It's an incredible, and not only that, check this out. It was the Olmec that created the calendar that the Mayan is known for, with 365 days based on what? The rotation, right, of the earth around the sun. When, you know, how many centuries later was it that Galileo got in trouble? You know, I'm saying that 7,000 years ago, right, black people had left Africa. How do we know? Maybe, you know, when I first read about this, the explanation that was given by Europeans who discovered them for themselves was that, well, maybe they're not black people. They might just look like black people because at the time these heads were created, they didn't have tools that were fine and delicate enough, you know, to give them the features of who we know they're supposed to look like, right? Or another explanation was they had just been there, and wind, erosion, and what have you had affected it, made them all look like black people, right? But they weren't really black people. But and then, of course, you've read also, you know, you've seen the things about, you know, maybe people from Mars, outer space, aliens, and what have you, created this kind of stuff, right?